just alluded on the belt fees and what the 3% that where the money is going. I think a lot of fighters feel the same. They have the same sentiment. What do you feel about his feelings towards that, and how, as a boxing community, work around that, and where that money do go to help these fighters?
I think it's a fair question, and sanction fees can be a good chunk of money, especially on these big fights. So I think it's a fair question to ask, and part of it is making sure there's communication. So if you're writing that check out of your purse, then you should know what you're getting. And clearly, Harold doesn't feel like he knows what he's getting, or maybe he doesn't feel like there's value there. So I think part of it is maybe helping facilitate a discussion, and if there are ideas that fighters can bring to the table they'd like to see. I mean, everyone knows they sanction fights and they do ratings and they do the belt, but the question is there needs to be a conversation about what other value they provide, and I think it's a fair question to ask.
Since we don't see Al Heyman, I want you to tell him that thank you, Al Heyman, for giving us this fight. Thank you, Showtime. Thank you, Steven Espinoza and your team. You've done an incredible job. 2023 is probably the best year in the sport of boxing. I'm saying it is the best year in the sport of boxing.
I've been in and around the sport for more than 20 years, and it's as good as any year that I can remember for any network. I think Showtime's at the head of that, but there's also some good fights going on outside of Showtime as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, guys.
All right. You're very transparent in terms of talking to the media. You're not shy about it. You're very active on Twitter. We don't see the CEO of DAZN or ESPN do that. What is the difference between you and, I don't want to say what's the difference between you and those guys, but why do you decide to go and talk to the media, something that people who are in your position usually don't do?
I'd say there's a couple things. I mean, one, I started Showtime almost 12 years ago. And look, nobody knew who I was when I started, and nobody knows what the strategy was, what the decision-making process, and it always seemed kind of strange. I mean, obviously boxing works a little bit different. The networks in the NBA and NFL, they're not helping determine schedule and turning down fights and games and things like that. Yeah. So I think it's fair for transparency. I think it is. I think fans want to know. I think it's helpful to understand how things fit together, how fights happen or don't happen. And I think more fans would probably appreciate that transparency throughout the sport, because it sometimes it's difficult to understand how things work and why things happen within the sport sometimes.
Did the transparency help or hurt this fight being made, or did it prolong negotiations?
Well, the one area that I try not to get too much into is sort of the substance of negotiations. I've said it many times. I've said it in social media and in interviews. I don't think that full transparency on negotiations I don't think transparency in negotiations is always helpful to the process, just because people have different impressions, different perceptions of things happen, and you sort of complicate things. People's egos get involved. People get concerned about how they're looking publicly. It affects the negotiation. So aside from negotiations, I think there should be transparency, but I think at a certain point, while you're in the midst of negotiations, I think that's something that should be within the parties. It makes it a lot simpler. And I've always sort of thought that the more you see people talking about a negotiation, the less negotiating there typically is. So the reality is, when you see promoters or networks or other people in general, talking, you've got to ask why. What's the agenda, what's the motive? And a lot of times it's not about I'm trying to make this fight or I'm trying to do this. It's creating the impression that they're trying to do this or that or the other. We all know, and we're not going to name any names, people in the sport who will throw out 5 potential opponents, 4 of which are ridiculous, but will be clickbait for interviews. So, and then 6 weeks later, guess what? Turns out to be the one that isn't ridiculous. That's the one who's fighting. So that's what I mean. It's tough in the context of negotiations to sort of separate what's true, what's not. So what my approach is I'm trying to be as transparent and honest as I can without affecting the business.